yours, Ethan.
Well, let me know when we should get. Are we live? What should I do? Are we
Yeah,
good
we
for
are
me to
live.
go?
You're live. Yes.
Okay. Hi, well, welcome to our affiliates and supporters abroad. My name is Ethan Young. I'm the Sub-Regional Secretary for North America for Public Services International. We are a global union federation that was founded in 1907. We are more than 700 trade unions representing over 30 million workers in 154 countries. Our members work in healthcare, domestic care, educational support, energy, water, and sanitation at the federal, state, municipal, provincial, and local level. We defend trade union and workers' rights, and we advocate for working people to have quality public services everywhere in the world. Today, we are here to discuss the impacts of the US election. And with some background, we've seen since the 1990s, neoliberalism has ushered in an era of privatization and austerity. This economic crisis that working people feel the brunt of has also generated the growth of the far right seemingly everywhere. We see insurgent of the far right in the United States, in France, Italy, India, Brazil, and even more countries trying to answer these problems that neoliberalism, privatization, and austerity have caused. However, their answers, what they're providing people across the world, are very toxic. They just offer up scapegoats for us to pin our frustrations to, all in the pursuit of the interests of both global capital and oligarchs and their personal, individual, and financial interests. Here at PSI and here in the global trade union movement, we believe the answer is not division and tribalism, it is solidarity, and that we need, spaces in which we can share the strategies that have led both to our victories, but also to our losses, so we can build our strength and our solidarity, both regionally and globally, to be able to fight, attacks on workers' rights, public services, and fight back this insurgent political ideology of division and racism. Today, we're going to get into the details of how this global rise of the far right, which has led to the return of Donald Trump to the presidency here in the United States, how that is affecting our members, here on the ground, from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. We have two fabulous union leaders, based on the East Coast and the West Coast, representing a diverse cross-section of the American working class here in North America. First, we have Jan Hockadel, who will be, leading this interview and discussion. She is the vice president of the American Federation of Teachers, and she is also the president of AFT Connecticut. She has held various union leadership roles, including serving as president of the State Vocational Federation of Teachers. She is also the co-chair of PSI Inter-America Regional Executive Committee and is an elected PSI executive board member. In addition to her union leadership roles, she is also an elected state senator here in the United States state of Connecticut, where she serves as the chair of the Aging Commission and the vice chair of the Environmental Commission. And from the West Cost, bright and early at 8 a.m., we have Max Arias, originally from El Salvador. He is the executive director of SEIU Local 99, a position he has held since 2015 as a first Latino to represent the 50,000 member strong education union in the state. Max has worked with SEIU across the United States in Michigan, Chicago, and California, eventually serving as the assistant director of collective bargaining and representation for SEIU Healthcare Workers West in Oakland. Max represents the United States here at PSI on the Inter-America Regional Executive Committee. So with all that being said, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our member leaders, Jan and Max, to introduce themselves and discuss how this election is affecting workers here in the United States and people abroad. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Max, and welcome to everyone again. I think everyone has those events in their lives that they can remember exactly where they are, where they were when those events happen. And I think for me, one of those events is going to be when I realized that Donald Trump was going to defeat Kamala Harris. And I was actually at my own victory party after getting reelected to my Senate seat. And I just remember being shocked and shattered. And I was even more upset when I learned that nearly half of union members voted for Trump. I couldn't imagine any union person voting for him, but many of them did. And it's up to us to find out why. I was also thinking back to the Supreme Court's Janus decision. And, when that decision was announced, removing the requirement for public sector members to pay agency fees, it was thought that the membership would drop and, in droves, and that unionized or organized labor would be destroyed. But that didn't happen. Instead, we had thousands of organizing conversations with our members. We listened to what they had to say, we found out why they were agitated, and we addressed their issues. And now we need to do that again. We need to find out why our members voted for Donald Trump, because we can't make them join us on our side or, accept our point of view. We're going to have to rethink how we talk, but more importantly, how we listen to our members and address their issues again. So, Max, I think the question many union leaders are being asked right now is like, how did we get here? What are your thoughts?
Hello, good morning, Jan, or afternoon, Alex, wherever you are. Thank you, and thank you, Ethan, for the introduction. The question, I can share with you like my analysis a bit on how we got here. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's in the United States. We have a two-party system. Not that that's the way it's established, but it's the way that it has been for a while. And any attempt at a third party has floundered. And those two parties that we have, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, are both their philosophy, their economic philosophy is neoliberal. At the end of the day, we know that Bill Clinton was involved in creating the free trade agreements with Mexico, et cetera, the initial free trade agreements, right, that started creating a lot of the job losses. So in that analysis, if we start thinking about it and how this economic system, neoliberal system, is based on inequity, as capitalism, it has to have always a group of people that it's going to exploit for basically no wages to be able to thrive. And we are here in the United States in the belly of the beast. This is the key. So what happened? Ultimately, people voted with their stomachs, for lack of a better word. The last 10 years, the U.S. has experienced serious inflation. It went up from around 2%, and during COVID, it went all the way up to 7%. Inflation is not just that's just part of it's just part of the problem, that the prices are so high that, for example, here in Los Angeles, in one of the richest areas in the world, there's 75,000 people living on the streets, no homes, nothing. That is what's led. On top of that, the wages and the compensation for people have just not kept up. Not only have they not kept up, but proportionally they have gone down, given the prices have gone up higher in proportion than wages have gone up. So people are struggling. Then comes COVID. COVID hits, and COVID has an interesting effect in the United States, in that when COVID hit, the president was Donald Trump. I remember the moments you talk about, Jan. I remember the first time he got elected and where I was in the living room, and I remember the second moment as well, when he got elected. As COVID happened, there was a force basically kind of, the government had to by force provide kind of a safety net. And I said kind of a safety net because it wasn't a complete safety net, but workers in the United States that had been experiencing unemployment insurance so low that you can't do anything with it. And no support for if you're going to be evicted because you don't pay your rent, well, you end up homeless. All of these things, during COVID, there was a softening of that. All of a sudden, the unemployment insurance were robust. The government sent checks to workers directly. Donald Trump himself signed the checks that workers got, et cetera, right? As well as protections from not being kicked out of your house, et cetera. We experienced this at the same time as workers were experiencing deep trauma especially the workers that we represent, essential workers who are out there and caring for society, right? After this happened, all these protections went away when Biden was the president. Biden won the presidency in 2021. These protections went away, poof, like nothing. People kind of had a memory that they felt, and there was a perception that they felt that they had been better economically under Donald Trump. Furthermore, Trump never stopped campaigning. The rhetoric of hate and division was right to keep exploiting the divisions that exist and to keep exploiting the fact that people are struggling. And furthermore, one more quick analysis is that as we were doing this election, people were struggling and they're still struggling. What do you tell the person that has 2 to 3 jobs and nothing has changed for the last 20 years for them? They still have to struggle. They still have 2 to 3 jobs. And Donald Trump managed to address that. Not that he sincerely is going to do anything about it. In fact, all his policies are opposite and contrary to improving the conditions of folks. But he addressed it by saying, you're struggling, I'm going to make sure you're not struggling. Whereas the Democratic Party, which we, even though both parties are neoliberal, we in labor tend to support the Democratic Party because it's not a party that is preaching hate. It's a party that's not preaching hate. It's a party that's not preaching racism. So we have to support that when we have 2 parties, right? That doesn't mean that we have to support it blindly, but we do have to support it. And so along comes, and what the Democratic Party did in reaction to people saying I'm struggling, it just said, hey, we have the best economy we've had in a long time, because it's true. As far as macroeconomics, inflation rate has come down significantly, but people are not feeling it because people are struggling. So when you hear somebody tell you, you know what, I'm going to lower your taxes and I'm going to put tariffs, even though we know tariffs are opposite to what we need to achieve, people start thinking, oh, well, at least, they're addressing. So there is a problem. There is a lack of a shared analysis and understanding as a working class in the United States. Who is holding us down and who are enemies? And I think it's important for us to start addressing that. So I could keep going on, and I'm sure you can keep going on, because it's a myriad, multiple issues. I mean, this is a nation of 300 million people, 51 states, and it's just, it's myriad of issues, but those are just some of the basic ones that I think happen.
Thank you for that. And, I was thinking that the path from Barack Obama to Donald Trump wasn't a simple one either. And I think the election of a Black president made it allowable in some spaces, like on Fox News, to claim that America no longer has a race problem. And in fact, they convinced people that it was the white Christian people who were under attack. And sadly, many polls now show the majority of white Americans believe they are now facing discrimination. And so the culture wars that used to lie below the surface have become a driving force in America again, and especially in politics. And those issues have drowned out the typical economic arguments that you were talking about. So we now have a country that seems more concerned about trans people in public restrooms or in high school sports than the fact that the federal minimum wage has not changed in 15 years. And no one seems to mind that billionaires pay lower tax rates than teachers or nurses. And somehow we ended up here. So, and I find it ironic that people cry fake news, but in fact, it's the billionaires such as the Murdoch family, the Elon Musk, that largely control the flow of our news and in our population. So in truth, most Americans were not watching what I was watching and reading what I was reading when I was following the election. And the clips that we see and the news that we read, they really start with choices. Do we watch Fox News or MSNBC? And then whatever news we choose gets amplified by algorithms and Facebook and on Twitter. And we've gotten to this place that it's not that Americans see the world differently. We actually are living in different worlds. So Max, the question is, how do we as union leaders, how do we break out of those silos? And how is labor reconstructing its communications with its members in working class communities post-election?
Before Jen, I'd just like to add one. I appreciate you bringing up Barack Obama and the racist element that exists in the United States. Is that this country hasn't grappled with the problem that we live a neoliberalism that is a racist neoliberalism based on exploiting ultimately Black people and also immigrants in this case. Right? And then the other element, just to add before I go on, is that Kamala Harris is a woman. And I think that had a lot to do with it. We still live in a society that's pretty misogynist, and we still need to keep, in which women make less. Like here, education workers we represent in Southern California, we represent our support staff, of course, and it's mostly women, and they have been forced to live on very, very little for a long, long time. That's why they had to strike in 2023. Same with family childcare providers and care workers, is the majority is women, and those jobs are underpaid. So it's just a society that we have to keep fighting to. But I wanted to just add that element that I think is important here. But how we are as unions, well, I think it's very important to think about, and I know pretty later we're going to talk a bit about Project 2025, right? But what's coming at us right now after this election, there was a lot of lies and misinformation, and as you shared, and a lot of lies said by Donald Trump of what he is going to do and achieve, right? And I think it's important right now to reset as unions our communication with our members. One, I think what you said, Jen, is very important. We have to act as community. We as a society have stopped acting as community. It's a very individualistic society. And I have heard you, Jen, a few times mention that we have to start reverting that. So one, it's important to start creating those spaces for our members, virtually and in person. I know after Zoom, we stuck to a lot of virtual stuff, but I've just really felt that there's no substitute for these in person. We also have to re-educate ourselves and understand how and why is it that the economic system society is holding the majority of us down, Black, brown, white. The fact is that this is a system that's created to hold us down. And to do that as unions, we need to start communicating with our members more directly, as you mentioned, one-on-one, and start creating spaces to educate ourselves, not only on the skill sets needed to be a unionist, such as organizing, collective bargaining, etc., but as well as understanding intrinsically what is holding us down and how can we affect that? How can we change that? For example, knowing that at the end of the day, these austerity measures coming at us are just making things worse. How do we know? How do we revert these things, right? One example, PSI is very adept at talking about fiscal policy. We have to create a progressive fiscal system. And that's what we have to face the Democratic Party to start doing, to start thinking about changing systems. So we need to communicate with our members like that. And we also need to continue to organize, not only internally, but externally, right? And when I mean internally, means current members that we represent. Externally, those members that are not yet union members, that could be union members, whether it be new industries and or current, bargaining unit members. So we need to organize, and we also need to continue to ramp up militancy and activism within the United States, along with the education and understanding how our rights are being affected, how this current government is coming after a lot of our rights. Then once we understand it, we also need to have a plan and understand how we're going to fight back. In the United States, over 50 states, as we know, not every state has the same rights. There are states in the southern part of the United States, such as Texas, just I want to say the name because everybody knows Texas, in which people don't even have public sector workers don't have a right to actually have collective bargaining. In other states, workers don't have a right to strike. So it varies by states. Where we do have the right to do so, like California, in places in the East Coast, we need to exercise that right to actually remind ourselves what is our power. What is our power as labor? It is ultimately our labor. We either give it or take it away in an organized fashion. The strike as an element. In places where we have the right, we need to continue to use the tool, not just to strike for strike's sake, because nobody likes to do that, but to improve these conditions and use that as a tool to start changing those relationships with the government, the economic relationships that are forcing us to stay down. If we do that in the places where we have the right, then we can give hope and chance to places where we are fighting for those rights. So I think it's important to a lot of these things, what you said, ultimately going back to creating community, understanding and remembering what our power is, how to exercise our power, what are our rights, And then what is the strategy and elements to start? If we communicate with union members like that, it's not just going to be union members. It will be working class people that will see a pathway and will see a light at the end of the tunnel.
I think you're so right. We have to have those really hard organizing conversations. Because I don't think the electoral college is going away. You know, and that system means that over 80% of our states, the presidential vote is already a foregone conclusion, right? It's true in Connecticut. Even though Trump did better than he did in 2020, he still lost by 15%. And we knew that was going to happen. So what we did was we concentrated on our state legislative elections. And we did historically better in those races because, as we told our affiliates, that directly, whatever happens in our state, that's what's going to directly affect our members. And so in reality, we no longer have that union density that you were talking about to determine federal elections. And if you look at that electoral map, you see, the South, which almost has no union presence, they overwhelmingly voted for Trump. And the Northeast and the West Coast, that's where our higher union density is, and that's where Harris carried those states. So it ultimately broke down into the upper Midwest, right? The Pennsylvania, the Wisconsin, the Ohio, and the Michigan. And those are union states that voted for Trump. But I don't think we can call them union states anymore because none of them even have that union density of, like, I think it's 13%. So we have to do a better job organizing. And so with that in mind, aside from the union side of it, how do you think the Democratic Party is going to reevaluate its messaging and their strategy post-election?
Well, I really hope they reevaluate it, but I think as you and I, Jan, are not going to sit around and just let them reevaluate on their own. We're going to have to force them to reevaluate. So if the Democratic Party is going to be the party that really has to start thinking about, I think, in my opinion, what I just kind of said recently, it's like, how does it effectively start changing the rules? Not only the rules so that people can do better, like creating a friendlier fiscal system. How do they, when they have a trifecta in a state like California, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor are all a Democratic Party. Why do we in California have such a high homelessness problem? This is the richest state in the country. It is actually, if it were a country, alone California would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And yet we have such a horrible problem, right? So I think in places that Democratic Party has to start rethinking how it acts in places where it has power and really start changing the rules, not only the rules to create economic conditions, but the rules to allow people to form their unions, because the rules in the United States to form unions are rigged. There's a reason. It's not by chance that we are at around 14% unionization rate in this country. That's not a coincidence. It's by design. It is a weakening of the laws that has been progressively. You heard Jan speak of Janus, the case in which they created the conditions so that there are no agency fees anymore in the public sector, so we're all right to work statewide. So the Democratic Party needs to start showing that it's willing to start doing those two things in the states. They're going to start in states, municipalities, and then has to really have a strategy to start winning local elections, the things that the Republican Party has done for decades, because it doesn't seem at times that the Democratic Party has a plan that's long term. So I think it's important to start seeing, I'm going to use the word humanize the economy. Bring the economy, instead of saying socialize, because some people, you say socialize the economy, you lose them, they think socialism. Let's think about humans as the cause for the economy. There's a reason why we pay our taxes, is so that we all human beings can be okay. Go back to the social contract. So we need to start seeing the Democratic Party act like that. We also need the Democratic Party to start talking and listening. I think Jan said it. Yeah. Listening to workers and directly addressing concerns, not glossing over them or saying, hey, why are you saying that inflation is awful for you if the economy is the best that it's been? Not saying to workers, we have almost full employment, yet all those jobs are pretty bad. They don't pay anything and there's no benefits, right? We want to see a Democratic Party that is truly advocating for healthcare for all, for example. That would be a big boon. So I think just want to reiterate, it's important specifically in places where the Democratic Party right now has control, that it is really truly willing to start changing the rules, changing the laws to improve the lives of people, and is really willing to listen and communicate and talk and act and organize together with workers. So and I know we're not gonna stay and with our hands crossed, with our arms crossed, just waiting for that to happen. We're gonna have to push for that.
Yeah, we have our work cut out for us. As you said, I'm really surprised more people don't see the benefits of being in a union. When you look at the wages, the health care, the pensions, that's kind of surprises me. I was also really surprised that, when we read about Project 2025, that didn't seem to have very much traction with people. It made me really afraid, but the average person, I don't think, saw that. So for those people that are listening that don't know, Project 2025 is, I think it's 966 page governing blueprint, if you will, which removes all the guardrails that protect our residents from corporate exploitation. So Max, do you think Project 2025 is, will it be put into action? And if so, will it be legislated, or do you think it'll be an executive order? What are your thoughts on that?
But I think it's so broad, you say 900 and some pages, that I think they do have an intent to try and put the whole thing into action. However, it depends on what it is they're trying to do, that they need executive action. And even though, just let me pause briefly to just remind us though that the election happened, Trump won, but so did the Republicans won the House and they won the Senate. But we keep hearing that they want a mandate. Let's be frank. The House is almost the same. There was no changes. There is no mandate. The House of Representatives is almost a stalemate. The Republicans have a very slim majority. Same with the Senate. So that there's a mandate to implement something like Project 2025 is a problem. So I think what we should do as unions is focus on how we're going to fight back on where we are concerned, right? And some of the examples of Project 2025, it have to do, for example, with not the elimination, but they want to change how Medicaid, which is healthcare for low wage and people with disabilities, is managed. The federal government gives to the states a certain match for utilizing this Medicaid. They want to change how this is dispersed, which would effectively mean that there will be a lot less healthcare for people that need the healthcare at that level. Furthermore, they're struggling to figure out how to put, for example, job requirements. So if you are somebody that is low income and all of a sudden has no job, you may not have healthcare. And the same thing they're trying to do with everything that the government calls entitlements, which has to do with unemployment insurance, et cetera. So there's a lot there. There's also the elimination of the Department of Education. I just want to bring that up because that's, I think, a very important thing for us. And another thing that's existential for unions that Project 2025 calls for is the elimination of public sector unions. They think there should be no public sector unions at the end of the day as well. And that's something that the Republican Party has been trying for decades to get rid. They've done it through the Supreme Court, which, by the way, we also have the Supreme Court. And so some of it has to be, for example, the Department of Education, because I know, Jan, that's near and dear, and it's near and dear to us as well. The Department of Education, to eliminate it, has to be legislated. There has to be the Congress, both houses have to actually pass something and et cetera to legislate it. So there's an opportunity there. And what they're trying to do there, really, the way they told people they want to eliminate the Department of Education is it's an anti-woke agenda. I'm using quotation marks. Yeah. It's an agenda of hate. At the end of the day, they claim through the Department of Education is how schools are able to teach students about things that students should be learning, let's be frank, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So anyways, so that is so. By the Department of Education, I think there's going to be a rude awakening when even Republican voters that voted for Trump realize that what's going to happen is going to affect all the children with disabilities. It's going to affect children with disabilities. They're not going to have one-on-one support. It's just crazy what could happen. So there's an avenue here, actually, at the end of the day, in the Department of Education to organize differently. Our union members, regardless of party, at the end of the day, we would be organizing to make sure that children with disabilities have the support they need. And I don't know who's going to be against that. So that's one example of the Department of Education. The Department of also the elimination of public sector unions is difficult, given that it would have to be some kind of Supreme Court decision. That's probably their easiest route to create a decision that goes through the courts and goes up. Otherwise, it's really left up to the states on the public sector, but they will immediately start enacting attacks on federal workers for sure, because they have the power to do so. So there's a lot. It really depends on what we fight. At SEIU, I know, and as an example, because this is where our union sits, is a fight on Medicaid. We want to make sure that we are fighting to ensure that folks realize that the federal government is going to be trying to diminish the access to healthcare to working people at the end of the day. And that fight, again, is a fight that could be nonpartisan. It's a core issue fight. So it's something we need to focus on as well as the Department of Education. So it depends, but we just gotta, we cannot, just because there's a document called Project 2025 and the government right now is completely gone Republican, the federal government, doesn't mean that we have to give in to it as if it's a certainty that it's going to happen. Because none of that is a certainty, and it really depends on how we organize to be able to push back on that.
Yeah. And when things do happen, we have to make sure our members understand, and actually the public understands what's happening to them. I was really surprised that more people weren't talking about the tax reform inside of Project 2025, right? Because it talks about passing tax reform legislation that could raise taxes up to like $8,000 a year. And it could skyrocket the price of household goods, especially for the middle class, while at the same time giving handouts to billionaire donors. And as far as an income tax, it would be one of the largest income taxes for the rich. And again, that will all go on the lower and middle income earners, right? And so it would really be just continuing Trump's legacy where he left off the first time. You know, we could possibly have the worst job record since President Herbert Hoover, you know, helping billionaires pay less taxes than the working class for the first time in history, and creating new incentives for companies to ship American jobs overseas. The government will be stripped of its resources and the ability to protect people and the environment. And corporations and the ultra wealthy will just have free reign to do what they want. And I'm really afraid that our minority and vulnerable populations will have their protections removed as well. You mentioned SEIU at AFT. We're comprised largely of public employees, healthcare workers, and public school educators. And as you mentioned, the healthcare system in the United States is already a disaster, and it's probably going to get worse. You know, women's healthcare rights, reproductive rights are on the minds for many of us. You know, we already had, you know, especially rural areas where there's little access to hospitals and doctors, and especially in Connecticut, we're seeing these hospitals in specific areas where the Black and brown communities, that they're shutting down things like maternity wards. And this is just going to continue because it solely focuses on profits of the healthcare industry and not the people that they're serving, right? And as you mentioned, we can expect Medicare and Medicaid to be rolled back. So access to healthcare will be determined solely by, you know, can you pay or not? We're in a sad state of affairs, I think. And as you mentioned, public education could possibly become a thing of the past. You know, Republican states such as where I am right now, Florida and Louisiana, they've already enacted large transfers of public dollars to private education companies in the name of parent choice. And these results have been disastrous for children, but really highly profitable for corporate owners. And we can expect more states to follow in that path. You know, as you mentioned, the proposed elimination of the Department of Education, my poor dear friend, Secretary Cardona, all the work that he's done, you know, under Project 2025 simply could be could go away. And again, the ban on public employee unions, allowing loopholes for employers to eliminate public employee unions, even in the middle of contracts. It could allow states to actually ban labor unions altogether. And it might allow the elimination of overtime protections and ignore the federal minimum wage. It's going to allow employers to just retaliate against the union organizing that we're going to have to do. It's just sometimes the outlook looks very grim to me. But switching issues for a moment, an issue you mentioned, and I find very disturbing, is what's going to happen with immigration. Even though two of Trump's wives, immigrated to the United States, he demonizes and dehumanizes immigrants, calling them animals, and they're poisoning the blood of America, and reviving that Nazi rhetoric. And the lies he told to people that they just seem to dismiss, like the one, immigrants are eating people's pets. I mean, that was just completely frightening. So Max, I guess the question is, how is labor preparing to protect these immigrant communities?
Yeah, immigration, that's another where Project 2025 calls for the elimination of homeland security and the militarization, basically, of immigration. And we've been here in the United States before during the suits. I forget the 30s where there was like anyways so look, I think that again it's a reaction again to understanding Donald Trump understands people are struggling and just knows how to demonize. This is a proven tactic that fascism has used for a long time. And the fact is, here in the United States, immigration is the immigrants themselves are a dynamic driving force of the economy, which there's a myth that they don't pay taxes. Actually, they do, but they, if you're undocumented, you just don't get any reimbursements. You just pay more taxes in proportion than others. And so how are we preparing to defend? Well, we did it through the first Trump term. This is going to be a more difficult endeavor, given that he's more cemented and has the Supreme Court, etc. But one thing we have to do is education. Yes. It's a lot of it, educating our members on knowing their rights, and in general, workers, right? That want to participate through the union first, knowing your rights, supporting workers in scenario planning, which is so sad that we have to do that. But that is what we're facing. We're facing a potential militarized deportation machine, in which they're planning to raid workplaces, etc. And I'm sure they're going to create some shows, for lack of a better word, for us to watch, in which they're going to go and do some large-scale deportations. So we have to do that. And these plans for members include, for example, for workers knowing, and this is a very sad scenario because we work in schools. What happens if a child's in school and the parents get picked up by immigration and then the child is left there, right? So making plans for contingencies such as that. Schools themselves, what happens is they finally decide to go into a school and start figuring it out. Also, we have to educate and support our members that may be here on the DACA and or TPS that they may be working a lot in the state. So there's a lot, but that is the other thing, of course, is continue to educate the public. But what is important, I think, is to continue our efforts to humanize immigrants. I'm an immigrant, as you heard. I'm from El Salvador, and I got my citizenship in 2019, right when Trump was president. Actually, it was kind of surreal. And what I mean by humanize is we hear the arguments even from our so-called our left, or that the reason that we shouldn't deport immigrants is because who's going to do our jobs? Who's going to pick the vegetables? We have to go beyond that and think about these immigrants as human beings, not as a resource to exploit, which is what we see it. We normally hear, folks, our prices are going to go up if we deport the immigrants. Well, is that really the only reason why, or is it because we cannot be treating human beings such as this? I think once we start humanizing and sharing the stories, even those people that voted for Trump, that are believing things such as like immigrants eat my pets, start seeing that human being that has the same values, family values as themselves, even though racism plays a big role, and that is a problem, but we need to continue to combat. It's important to start seeing them as human beings, because if we start seeing them as us, as human beings, we immigrants are the same, then there is going to be a lot less hate. So I think that's important for us to continue to do. Prepare, provide resources, legal resources, work with community partners, etc., to defend ourselves and start thinking long term as labor and left on changing our immigration laws. We're always have a short-term analysis and a fight for immigration reform, and immigration reform is not a short-term fight. It has to be a long-term fight. And so that's what we're going to have to do. And we're also going to have to steel ourselves. What I mean by that is we're used here in the United States to protests and having rights to protest, and that we can go out and protest and not get our heads banged in necessarily. It does happen, by the way. People do get their heads banged in, and there is get tear gas flowing and everything, but not to the levels that we see in other countries. Under Donald Trump, I know that he's going to do his best to create such fear and terror that if we protest, that we have to combat that and be ready to act and protest in peace, but be ready for the other side not to come with us peacefully.
Yep.
So that's what I mean, but we have to steel ourselves. And it's going to be apparent as we're defending our immigrant sisters and brothers.
Absolutely. And I know one other thing that we did in my state of Connecticut is we made sure that labor elected legislators that actually promise to protect our communities and our members. And, we have to maintain our sanctuary status in our states. I think that's really important, but that's, we're hoping we don't have to get to that point, right? Because as you said, I think the most direct action we can take is to organize workplaces in our communities. There's obviously difficulties in doing that, language in some cases, sometimes cultural barriers. But I think the biggest problem that you hit on is companies often take advantage of our confusing and punitive immigration laws, and they convince the workers that their residency status could be jeopardized by participating in a union drive. Companies will spend millions on anti-union campaigns, and regardless, the best thing unions can do for our immigrant communities is to give them that union protection and then the sanctuary if it's needed. So a lot of our organizing is going to depend on the Department of Labor. You want to clue us in on who is nominated for the Secretary of Labor, and how could that possibly affect organized labor?
Yes. Sorry, I am. I keep forgetting the name. Lori Chavez. Yes. So it's interesting. Lori Chavez is the name. You might know more about Jan, so please speak on her. But it's what I'm saying is interesting. It's a bit of hope, but at the same time, she's going to be working in such a hostile environment that we need to keep organizing. But since Trump, it's out there that he won 50% of the union vote, although again, these are exit polls, so we'll see at the end of the day what happens. He put a Secretary of Labor that is from Oregon, even though being Republican is a person that seems to have been working well with labor in Oregon. In one of those rare cases, not what we expected from the Department of Labor. And so there is some light of hope there in that we can, not have such a hostile environment coming from the Department of Labor. And we'll see. Maybe it's a sign that he's not going to be assigning too crazy people that are too gun-ho in the NLRA, in the National Labor Relations Board, so the NLRB, which is the one that governs. But there is some hope, but it makes sense politically that he would do that, given that he was appealing to workers, et cetera, et cetera. But then if we see all the other picks, it takes away a lot of that hope. But, hopefully, I don't know, Jen, what do you think of that, of her?
Well, I am a little leery because she is currently a Republican representative, but she is surprisingly not terrible. She was supported by the Teamsters, especially their president, Sean O'Brien, who controversially did not endorse either candidate in this election. But her labor record is far more worker-friendly than anyone really hoped for. It's kind of funny because in response, papers such as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post, they're kind of freaking out because of this pick. So We don't even know if she will survive the Republican Senate confirmation or have any real power, but like you said, in the sea of horrible cabinet nominations right now, she kind of is the bright spot, but we'll have to see if it actually goes through, right?
Yeah.
So AFT and SEIU represent a significant portion of care workers, across home care, childcare, nursing services. And the majority of this workforce, they're the working class women, a lot of from migrant communities. And these workers are on the front line, especially, during COVID, which worsened their burnouts and affected the staffing levels. And now they're facing potentially further disruption and instability. So how are you planning to keep these workers engaged and organized in the movement, especially over the next 4 years? And how can the international union movement support this?
Yeah, it's the attack is crazy, and I'll talk a little about home care. In that during the first Trump administration, I don't know if you're aware, he was trying to make a rule change. And I'm sure Jan, you're aware of it, but our listeners, is trying to make a rule change in which it would then make it unlawful for any dues deduction to come out of the payroll when you're actually a worker that is working in the Medicaid system or Medicare system. And so what that will do effectively, given that most of our unions depend on payroll deduction, it will decimate the one movement, right? So that's one direct potential connection that could happen. But I think it's important right now, again, to remind our members that this is the opportunity to organize loudly and to educate the public. And what is it that we do? Education, care workers, home care workers, family child care providers. They are vulnerable because we depend a lot on federal, specifically home care workers. They depend on Medicaid, which we just talked about is potentially going to be decimated and or completely revamped. I don't know if eliminated, but changed around. And a lot of the child care providers, a lot of them depend on Medicaid to actually have healthcare. And the families they serve, which are low-income families, depend on that as well. And so it's a lot of threats. How are we organizing? Look, I want to give an example because I think that's the easiest way, and I'll talk about California because this is where I organize with them. We represent in 2020, 40,000 family childcare providers in the state of California, mainly Black, brown, immigrant women who were basically making no money and caring for the children of California, organized their union under Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the president at that time. They organized their union after a 20-year fight in a democratic state that forced them to have a 20-year fight just to organize their union. So if we think about, we are used to fighting, whether it be a Democrat or Republican, that we are fighting somebody. Here in California, we're fighting, it's a democratic institution in the state, the governor, et cetera, that even then, we had to fight for everything we have. But we stick with the Democratic Party. Again, I just want to use this opportunity. Why? Because the Democratic Party at the end of the day is not out there preaching hate or trying to take away your rights, which is what's happened in Florida, in which the Republican governor took away a lot of the rights of those members, and unions have really struggled in Florida. Not because the workers are not strong, it's because the system of laws is holding them down. So I just wanted to put that point why. But ultimately, everything our members have in the care sector, we have fought for. In fact, the home care workers and child care providers did not have the right to have a union in this country up until the 2000s, in which finally home care workers in Illinois figured out they had to change the law to make it lawful for them to have a union. And then we started doing that in many states, the same in childcare. So it's very recent that we have a union. So our members, care workers, they have fought, and some of them that are right now members fought to have their first union, and we had to fight an uphill battle. Yeah. So we need to energize and to face what we're having is we need to even up the militancy and keep our demands.
Yeah.
Why? Because if we don't keep our demands, what the opposite is going to be is austerity, and it's just going to be a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen. So we cannot it's important for us to not see what's happening as certainty, but keep organizing in a very militant, visible way that attacks what we said initially, the rules that hold us down. So I think that's how we need to keep fighting, and that we're committed to doing that as unions.
Agree. In healthcare, it's always important to focus on the patients too, as well, right? People who dedicate their lives to helping people, they can be moved if they see the connection between the administration policies and their patient outcomes. And, my union represents more nurses in our state than any other union, and a surprising number of them are Republicans. And so we continue to talk to them about their issues and how to improve their work condition at the bargaining table, in the community, and in the legislature, like I mentioned. So when they believe in a union and they see that we're fighting for them, that's when we have them. Really important. So very quickly before we conclude, what can PSI affiliates abroad, the trade unions in general, what can they do to support the struggles that we expect to have in the United States?
All support is welcome to start there. And I think one is I think it's important. Me, as having lived outside the United States for half my life, I remember seeing the United States as a monolith, in which everybody was probably doing okay. Workers that were struggling were not really struggling. All these things. I think it's important to for affiliates to start. If you haven't yet, continue to learn more about the struggle of workers in the United States. It is massive. It is the same. The fear is the same. The bosses have the same tactic, and we know that capital is global. And this attack on public sector unions is global, because the public sector unions are the last holding the line on ensuring that societies function as societies and don't have austerity. So I think it's important to stay engaged, create spaces like this to be able to continue to communicate through that work, through continuing to communicate, through continuing to meet and continuing to work. We will find the spaces in which we can support each other with direct solidarity. As we are mounting our defense, for example, when the government Trump starts again deporting people, putting people kind of like concentration camps, I don't know how else to put it, or jails in which they have kids in cages. I don't know if you saw that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to amplify and make sure that everybody understands that, and we need to figure out a pathway, whether it be through social media and or other governments, to start to put pressure. So I think the more important than anything is staying educated, staying in solidarity, continue to build these spaces, because these spaces are going to be the catalyst on how we find a direct way to support each other.
Yeah. And I know when we were just a few weeks ago at our convention in Bogota, Colombia, it was just nice to know and talk to people where their politics have already been broken in the past, or they're even broken now. It's just nice to be able to hear and learn from other leaders how to stay optimistic and continue that fight. So I think the biggest help is just showing us how to not feel defeated and how to keep fighting that good fight in the face of increasing odds. So Max, I will ask you, is there any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
No, I think we've spoken a lot. I think just to add to the last is, I think we need to learn. And you just said it, Jan. I just want to reiterate what you just said more directly. Learn from other movements what they've done in this phase of hopelessness, such as Brazil. Remember having their
Yes.
jailed and never gave up, or Argentina, who's facing Milei, El Salvador, who's facing Bukele. That's where I'm from, etc. We see it in Europe. And so I think it's important for us as the labor movement in the United States and the left to learn also from other movements on what they've done. But closing, I don't have many closing words, but to say we got to keep fighting.
Yeah.
Hope is a plan to win. I know that we have that in us. We have seen these moments, these dark moments before. This country lived through Ronald Reagan and Bush. What was it, like 16 years of that? That created a lot of what we're living right now, but here we are. So I think it's important to just keep organizing, keep learning, and keep building that community.
Yeah. Max, when Donald Trump was first elected, it was said he would be like a tornado going through a trailer park, right? That it would cause a tremendous amount of damage in a short time and take a long time to clean up. But the thought was we'd, eventually recover. And some of that damage, either could not be cleaned up or we're still working on it. And hundreds of thousands of lives were unnecessarily lost from the failure to respond to COVID. And that really can't be changed. And reproductive rights have been, protected now state by state, but there's still millions of women, mostly in the South, who have not recovered the autonomy over their own bodies. And now another tornado has just hit, and the damage will be even greater because the recovery from last time was not complete. So, but as you said, we cannot afford to be discouraged and give up. Instead, we have to do what we can to limit that damage and start planning for the next recovery now. And as my president, Randy Weingarten, says, we'll continue to fight for common sense solutions to make sure our members, their families, and our communities are treated with respect and dignity. We'll work to ensure our schools are welcoming and safe. We'll work to make sure everybody has decent health care, wages, and retirement security. And we will continue to fight for all Americans to have the right to a union. And it is important for labor that, as always, that we take the lead in this process. And there's a reason the right wing views us as the enemy, because we put in the work and we get the results. And we just have to find common ground with our members that affirms our values and together to do the work. And it's an enormous challenge, but labor has never backed away from a fight yet, and we won't back away from this one. Ethan, we turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Max and Jan. I'll say I'm at least walking away with optimism. It's so important for us to have these spaces, that's facilitated in this instance by PSI to talk about these issues and to hear that there are, like Max alluded to, that we defeated Bolsonaro in Brazil, that, the catastrophe that is Malay, the catastrophe that's happening right now in El Salvador, is there is a fight back. There are strategies that can bring these tyrants to heel, that can bring their governments down. And that it's through learning from one another. We don't have all the answers, about Trump here in the United States. We might have to reach out across the world and have these exchanges and opportunities to learn from each other. And, that, helps us politically, but it also helps us at the bargaining table to understand how so deeply intertwined we are as working people and workers. The same as, our bosses and our employers are also, globally minded and intertwined economically. So is our plight with one another, regardless of our national borders. So thank you all so much for, shining some light on what is a scary topic here in the United States and how that impacts working people across the world. It really is an honor to have leaders like you to be able to share this information to our brothers and sisters and comrades across the world. So thank you so much for being with us here today. And, La lucha sigue, struggle continues. Have a good day.